welcome to this, our next course in A Deeper Peace of Mind, which is on the topic of resilience. And I have invited Leela Turner to come and talk with us today. And that's just to give you a little bit of background of how I know Leela, and then why I brought her here and asked her to do this course with us. I actually got to meet Leela to start with through studying with One Thought. And first of all, I did a virtual program, then I did a real program, then I did another real program. And Leela was there in the room when I did the live in-person things, and we had a few glasses of wine. And so I've got to know her a little bit outside of the kind of teaching environment, but also when I was sitting in the room with her, when she would share her insights and the work that she was doing and what she was seeing about the nature of the principles, it always really impacted me. And I had a lot of respect. I didn't kind of know that I was going to learn so much from Leela as I went through the program, but I really did. Every time she spoke, I really learned something that was really helpful to me. And then Leela, so I did that for a few years, and we had a few glasses of wine in the bar in London. And I did a little bit of consulting work with One Thought as well. And then really, so Leela's kind of been in and out of my life over the last few years, but I heard her speaking at the conference, the Three Principles conference this year. And she was given a topic unexpectedly because the person who was supposed to be doing the talk wasn't available. And I really loved what she had to share there. And I wanted to ask her along here to share some of that with you that she has spoken about, but also so that I could ask her all the questions that I might have, and we can dive a little bit deeper all together into this topic of resilience. And resilience really, and I'm going to ask Leela to talk, we're going to be talking more about this over the next 4 weeks, but to me, that bounce back ability is like when you find yourself anxious, stressed, having another panic attack when you thought you were over all that now, but here it is back again. That ability to bounce back and see yourself as healthy, whole, and absolutely fine again is, to my mind, that's kind of the area of resilience. But I want to hear Leela's take on it anyway. But this week, this first module, I really wanted to. I've called it Finding Truth because I love hearing, like, I didn't really know Leela's journey into the principles until recently when you spoke about it at the conference, Leela, but I wanted you to share with people listening here. Many people won't know you, they won't know your work. So a little bit about you, but how you found this understanding and what it did for you. I think it's such a hopeful story, and I'd love it if you wouldn't mind sharing. So big warm welcome to you, to our Deep Peace of Mind group. And yeah, do you mind just sharing a little bit of how you found this understanding and your journey, because it wasn't the most straightforward, I know.
No, it's really hard not to go back to when I was like 21, and I'll try and do it briefly, but it's relevant. So when Aaron and I got together, I think of, oh my God, 21 is a baby now, but I thought I was relatively grown up at the time. But we started dating in my last year of uni. And when I first started dating Aaron, I think I'd got fed up with dating because I just started to feel like, this is a terrible thing to say, but disappointing Christmas gifts. Like, I wanted to feel really connected in relationships and was dating really just really beautiful, lovely, mysterious guys. And then I'd wait for this big reveal where I'd feel really connected to them. And it just sort of didn't happen. And I thought, well, this is a waste of time. And thought, oh, well, I'm not going to date anymore at 21, which is funny. And ended up falling into a relationship with Aaron in a way that was so unlike every relationship I'd had before. It was softly involuntary. Like, I felt so soft with him, and which was so unlike me, because we didn't have so many. I mean, I'm 48 now, but the labels that we're throwing around were more like codependent rather than anxiety, or, they weren't the terms, there were a different set of terms when I grew up. But I definitely would have been definitely would have been described as sort of an anxious. I think my mum prided me on being very resilient because I was tough and would keep working till my knuckles bled, and I was very good with money. But really inside I was like a frightened little mouse, all the time. And I think when I started dating Aaron, I discovered something very soft inside of me. And it was so dreamy, like we'd even just lean against each other with our arms, and I'd literally melt. And I had no understanding of the principles, but it was a living proof of a mind at ease. But I didn't really understand it. I kind of thought, I didn't know really what to make of it, other than I feel incredible when I'm with him. But as we started dating further and further, I started to sort of, my anxiety sort of started to flood back in, a bit like when you go into the beach and you tread on the beach and you lift your foot, and then for a minute there's no water or sand there, and then the water starts to flood in, right? So it didn't happen for a couple of months, but it did start to flood in. So I started to speed up and get quite anxious with him. And I think, all of my habitual stuff had gone on pause when we first started dating. And I never really understood what was happening. I didn't understand that soft feeling was actually what's underneath. I just didn't understand that. And and so the whole story is quite entertaining. So when we first started dating, literally the first year, he mentions that he's got family in America, and I was like, cheap holiday, let's do it. We're both students. I think I was in the last year of my degree, and I can't remember whether he'd started his PhD, but either way, it was like two monies to rub together, just about made the flight, and so we went to stay with George and Linda the first summer. And this is a weird story leading up to my understanding. What I discovered when we hung out with them is we just again had this very soft feeling with them. And I couldn't really get my head around that you would hang out for no good reason. Now, I thought everything had to have purpose and a label, and I thought value was attached to suffering. It's a bit of a weird thing to say, but my family are very tightly wound, but they're passionate and they connect, and I feel like they connected the two. And there's this lopsidasical kind of part of Aaron's family that just want to hang around and goof about, like it's a very American term. And I'm like, I discovered it's a funny story because I discovered a goofy part of me. I was such a serious kid, and I discovered this goofiness. So then I just was like, this is like, I just couldn't believe that there was lightheartedness and that was okay. I had no idea that you were allowed to be off duty and that you didn't have to prove yourself. So what do I do without understanding? I blame it on them, and I blame it on being about in La Conner, and I blame it in being in the country, and I blame it in all these kinds of things. So of course, what do? We go back every year. And then we would, and Aaron at this time was, starting to kind of learn a little bit more about the principles. And I guess the first time, so outside of feeling, not being it specific, I started to feel the principles when I would feel that softness inside of myself, but I thought it was circumstantial.
Yeah.
Because there was no evidence in my upbringing. I didn't remember or recollect times when I was at ease until much later.
You wouldn't question it, would you? It would just be obvious. Well, I'm with Aaron, I really like him, so therefore he makes me feel great, and so do his family and being in America. Like, why would you ever question that?
No, I mean, because it seemed reliable every time. Little did I know, probably before I got on the plane, I would start to drop away thinking, because I'm going there. Yeah. And so I would show up and I had like a secret life. I'd go over there, be relaxed, come back here and fall into my London thinking and start to speed up. And I was working in fashion, and I had actually, in terms of this being about resilience, we were around the principles, but my learning was theoretical. So I used to, binge listen to George's tapes to try and calm me down, because I was so worried and self-conscious when I was doing my MA. And then I was in my first job, and I had the guy who managed the floor that I was in, was really, like, properly objectively quite mean. Like, he was not kind. So he would play mind games and stuff. And I think that's quite funny now, but at the time I wanted to be resilient. So I wanted to use the principles. So that looked like trudging back into work and holding on really tight so I could get through the day and knowing it's thought. But, you know, when you're telling yourself it's thought, you don't really believe it. So it's kind of like one of those war movies where they're walking through the mud and they've got rotten feet and their boots are broken. I mean, every day felt like that. But I've had, there's some, I'm doing it for a cause.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to prove to myself I wasn't going to buckle. I had no idea that my experience really of everything in a way that actually counted was coming from me. I didn't know that. I just knew enough to sort of try and keep going. And Aaron talks about it later. He said, I came home crying every day because for me, it was brutal. And I was just very sensitive, but also quite self-conscious and analytical. So I was trying to apply the principles to being resilient in my job. And bless my heart, I think if my head had cleared, I'd probably have got a lot bolder, a lot braver, demanded that I do more design stuff or gone somewhere else because I was good at what I did. But my idea of resilient was sticking with it. But it had this, like, you know, the idea of sort of sitting in the dentist chair. I'm not going to take Novocaine or any of those pain meds. Just do it. You know, it was like that idea rather than seeing what made sense to me, being a bit more present. So that in terms of like learning the principles and it being in my life, I feel like it had already impacted my life. I just didn't understand. There was no understanding behind it. So it was external. But there was a pivotal moment that really it impacted my life that changed the course of my life. And that was through Aaron's understanding. So often people will say it has to be, you know, you both have to learn the principles. So often, you know, you'll meet people and say, well, my husband or my partner, or they all need to know the principles. And that's actually not true. So when we first got together and we had our first little we had our flat in East London, and we literally took me 2 years to pay off the deposit, which was £2,000. It was like £50,000 for a flat there. And that was shocking. I cried the first day we moved in because I was so frightened by this, you know, financial burden. And Aaron had been, you know, doing some helping George with one of the books that he was writing. So he was doing the research and helping him. And so he'd gone to sit in on some of the work in Le Connor. So he'd gone and studied it. And when he came back, we, by that point in our relationship, had formulated relationship routines. So when I would get anxious and I would get wound up, and then at a point I didn't really know how to crack the lid of my tension. So I think of sometimes our heads like a rice cooker.
Yeah.
You know how it will bubble like crazy and then spit all over your stove and then burn the pan if you don't let off some of the steam or turn it down. You know, like it's literally, so I would get really, really tense. And then I would look at him and go, it was his problem. And like, why'd you leave that here? And you're so messy and you've done this wrong and you've done that wrong. And he at first would try and do the things I wanted. Like he tried to fold the sweaters the right way or put his, you know, he just couldn't do it the way I wanted it, because he would never do it the way I wanted it, because it was coming from anxiety, not from, I don't know, let's make a plan on what makes sense to both of us. I wasn't addressing the anxiety. I was listening to the thinking that came out of my anxiety. And so we'd have this thing where I'd get really anxious. I'd go up to him and usually he would try and deal with me with logic and say, listen, maybe you da-da-da. And I'd keep going and I'd pick and pick and pick. And I'm not a bad person, but I honestly didn't know how to get any shift other than having upset.
Yeah.
So at some point he'd go, listen, love, listen, love, listen, love. And then be like, because I'd be so rude. It was so rude to him. And then he'd eventually join in and we'd be in our happy upset together. And we'd have we didn't have big fights, but he'd be upset and offended, which is quite right, because I was like mean. And
but he was quite, at that point, he was quite insecure at that point as well, wasn't he? Quite early on. Like he would tell stories of when he first met you and he was quite insecure around relationships and stuff. And then he met
this is a little bit after that. That's right. A whole other story.
Kind of like a few steps more grounded than you are at this point, right? Just like
he was always, I mean, I think I just feel like I was I've always been quite instinctive, and he's much more knowing. He's got a softer, natural knowing in a way that mine is much more instinctive around life. Yeah. So what happened was I go to pick a fight with him. I remember I was sitting in the living room. I get home, I'm tired. I've had one of these horrible days at work. And there's some, I don't know, dirty socks in a coffee cup or something, like, disgusting, that's outrageous. And I go to pick a fight with him and I see him rise up, start to go, and then he just stops and he doesn't. And he doesn't just stop there. He backs off. What felt like he backed off me, and he kind of did this. And he didn't say anything. And I'm basically waiting at the fight altar for my groom. I talk about it like the fight altar, you know? And he just backed off, and I see him back off. I was confused, felt abandoned, and thought, he must not love me because he doesn't care enough to get upset. It doesn't matter enough for him to be upset. But there was a way that he did it. It wasn't cold, but it was like, it was lumpy. You know, when you learn a new language, the words might not make a beautiful sentence, but something was happening that was new to him. And so much so that I like, you can't fight on your own, it turns out, you're just shouting. So I calmed down, and a couple hours later, I asked him, what happened? Because I'm really confused, because that's not what we're supposed to do. He's supposed to do his part. And he didn't really have a finessed way of saying it. He said, I could, you know, like, he's like, I could see what we were doing, and I didn't want that for us. And I was like, oh, me neither. I just literally no idea. It would be like walking down an alley that you get beaten up and mugged every time, but not knowing there's another road to walk on.
Yeah.
So I was literally, this is so interesting because I didn't understand, but that made sense to me. I didn't know how to do it for myself. I didn't know how particularly to do it in the future, but it put something on the table. The feeling that we did things in, he didn't want to be in that feeling. I didn't have anything to apply, but from that moment, he started navigating us and me differently. So he didn't want to try and solve things from upset. He didn't want to deal with whatever was going on from a disturbed state of mind. So that, and I'm pointing to this because you'll have, you know, you get moments that are gifts, and just because we don't understand it, they're breadcrumbs. Because I didn't have any understanding of the principles. It was something he did, but it resonated with me. It just, like, before I had a chance to argue, well, that's stupid, something in me said, yes, thank you. Oh, I get it. Me too. Like, it's a really healthy version of the Me Too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hashtag love me too.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And then various stories in between. So this is a couple of years into our relationship. So fast forward, gosh, I want to say 15 years. I spent the next 15 years, we eventually moved a couple of years later to Lacona. We were sort of dumped into this town of 800 people, and it had a lot of the early practitioners that were, you know, working in, you know, so the practice Aaron was working in was directly mentored by Sid. So he would come down, do training, speak with the staff on the phone, and we would go up to Salt Spring, and I was like, you know, wife. So I'd get to go and I'd sit at lunches. So I was around it. And I think for the first few years I tried, everybody looked like they were sort of, I don't know, smoking some kind of healthy weed. Because they were like, didn't seem to be serious about a whole lot. And they seemed to be talking about something. I could feel there was something there, and it made sense to be happy. But I didn't really understand how they got there. So I tried to concentrate on what I heard. So I went to many Sid seminars, and I felt things inside my body. So I would sit there and feel something resonate. But my intellect was like, I don't know, like a breeze block of belief systems.
Yeah.
And I know that I got affected by him, but I had it was so difficult for that to get through and come out in clear thought, because I was just gridlocked of thinking. Now, I didn't think I was a bad listener. So when you ask most people, how good a listener do you think you are? And the people are like, oh, I'm amazing. Usually just really, I'm amazing at listening to myself. Listen, right? So I think what was really happening is, particularly in the first few years when I was really earnest and thought, I want to get what they're having. I want to smoke whatever happy whatever they're doing. And so I was very earnest. I'd show up and I'd really listen. But if I look back at when I listened, to Sid talking, he'd say certain things like wisdom. Now he'd say wisdom and I would be like a clever little 7-year-old in class go, oh, I know the answer. 2 + 2 is 4. Probably actually I was 2 + 2 is 5. I know this one. Right. So in my mind, I was a sort of a bit of Hermione Granger, but not a smart kind. I was like, I know the answer to that. So he would say wisdom. I'd go to Purple and Glastonbury, and my parents were really like, so my father is Jewish and my mother is Catholic, and then they sort of settled on sort of, goddesses and everything in between. We had everything growing up. We had a bit of spirituality and everything, but it all had process. So I grew up with a lot of beliefs of what everything meant.
Yeah.
And I'd read books. And so if he said spirituality or wisdom, I would sort of tumble in with my thought library of memory. Oh, yeah. And just go right to it and felt like, oh, yeah, me and Sid are buds. We know what we're talking about. And I sort of felt like, yeah, I know. I just sort of felt like I was doing a good job because I knew what he meant. I didn't realize I basically was interrupting him in my own head. I was talking right all over him. So have you ever had that when you're sitting with a friend and they're talking and they're like, God, I'm really feeling a bit funny today. Oh, me too. Guess what happened to me yesterday? I was just, oh, me too. And then I had this feeling when you basically just cut your friend off.
Yeah.
So that's what would happen to me. Now it was confusing because I had really good will towards Sid. So, but I just thought if I felt lovely towards him, then I must be doing a nice job listening.
And I just wanted to interrupt you because the two points there. So there's the point with Aaron when you're absolutely not feeling in a good feeling, you're caught up, you're angry, he says something and suddenly you hear him and it lands and truth lands with you. Me too. I want to feel different. Like when you were describing it, you could feel the moment of truth landing. And then there's the experience of you with Sid where, yeah, I'm in a good feeling. Yeah, I understand everything. Yeah, I'm totally buy into this. Yeah. And no indefinable, indescribable moment of truth dropping at that stage in your story.
Well, I think I had two things going on. One is he would say stuff, it would stir something in me. When you hear something and it hasn't reached your intellect and you feel it, it's like, I think of it as like, sometimes I talk about insight, like someone's moving furniture in the other room. You don't know what the furniture is, but you can feel something moving.
Yeah.
So I did hear him. I felt something, but because I was thinking so hard so when I listened to Aaron say that, I actually was asking the question, what happened?
Yeah.
And when Sid was talking, I would get affected, but there was sort of nowhere for it to go. I mean, I suppose, I don't know. There was nowhere for it to go, but I was just, I would basically interrupt my own hearing of him with my dialogue about what I thought. And I thought the job was to try and do a good job like it was a maths test. I was so earnest. I was trying to fill in the blanks. So I do think that I felt, because I would feel things, but my intellect was so dense that there was very little way for anything to flow through me.
Yeah.
Or if it did, it sure didn't go on my radar, because squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's quite an American phrase, but like if it shouted in my head or had an intensity or a drama passion, then I'd listen to all that, but I didn't listen to anything quiet or soft.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't know whether I had wisdom thoughts and then just trod all over them like a patch of pretty daisies on the lawn. I don't really ultimately know. What I do know is I gave up. Right. At some point, watching other people, and it was like watching from inside a goldfish bowl and looking at people running around live together in a room. So for me, I remember I'd go to conferences and people would see each other or meet each other for the first time or see a friend, and they would come together like two humans and would have this really beautiful energetic interchange of energy. Hey, and they would enjoy each other's energy in the conversation. There was a richness and there was no efforting. There was no calculating. There was, not everybody, but those are the ones that stood out to me from behind the glass over here. And I'd been, a number of years, and I think some point I decided, oh, that doesn't seem to be easy for me, because whenever I try, so I actually remember a few times going and like, that looks like a really lovely interaction, I'm going to go over. So I would go over to the conversation and try and join in. And I describe it as like a bit like trying to go into my sister's bedroom with her friends and try and act cool. And, you know, and it's just like everyone knows that you're 4 years younger and you're super uncool. And the way I describe it is they look like sort of raspberry, you know, raspberry ice cream. And I basically came along with my Marmite spread and sort of stirred it in. And it's like, and I think my feeling, because I was just so anxious, would people, I don't know. It's not like I was bad. I just was a bit jarring because I didn't see the feeling. I didn't see my feeling. And it wasn't until, you know, 15 years in that I saw, oh, that's feelings telling me about thought. So there came a point years before that where I gave up. I actually felt quite sad. I thought that feeling good and getting it was for the nice people. And some people were just wired a bit funky, like a seconds that's never going to quite work right. So I kind of carried myself and my pride away. You know, I loved everybody that I was around. I really respected them, but I stopped trying to be part of it because every time I did, I felt like I broke a piece of china.
Right.
So I kind of gave up. I really loved the approach. I was really behind it. I would refer people to it. But I gave up on myself being somebody that could get it in a way that would tangibly feel different for me. I knew that there was a feeling to understanding. I just couldn't seem to get to the feeling different. I had all the ideas. I could describe it to you, probably do diagrams, but I didn't feel different.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get it from here to here. Couldn't. So I was like, well, I'll leave it for the nice people.
So what happened? Like, when did it land?
So what happened was we moved back to London. So Aaron set up One Thought, and we are living in like the tiniest little house. We've got enough savings to last us maybe 6 months, and the economy had crashed, and we're in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And Aaron's moved to London to set up a business. We have no clients, nothing. But I'd kind of learned to come out of fear about external things in terms of those kinds of things. And we were living in London, and I'm working in fashion. So I was working in children's wear then. And Aaron was, I don't know if he was a year or two into sort of running One Thought. So he was at the time working with corporate clients and also doing a training called the One Thought Institute, which was like a 10-month institute training. Now, what I was doing was I was helping out from behind the scenes, because I was sort of, you know, I go and sort of, you know, put flowers in the room and see if anyone needed anything. And I'd kind of be around and I'd listen from the back. But I also, so I like being around it. But what actually really happened is that the London conference happened, and Aaron was organizing it. So I got a free ticket to go. And usually I couldn't go to all 3 days, but this year I could go to all 3 days. My work schedule allowed me to go for full 3 days. And I basically went to hang out with friends from the States. I was like, oh, I'm going to see Kathy. Oh, I'm going to see those guys. Because they like sort of Dickon and Keith and everybody and Sandy, they lived in the town I lived in, or like a couple miles away. So that I'd lived in there from my 20s to my 30s. So it felt like family to me. I was really excited to see everybody. It's kind of like a family catch up. So I was just like, oh, wouldn't that be so sweet to see them? What a treat. So I went kind of thinking I'll sit through the sessions and then get to visit with people in the breaks. So it was the first time I ever showed up not trying to get what everybody else had.
Right.
So I don't really know. I don't know whether there's a such thing as readiness. I just don't know. All I know is that I wasn't trying. So I wasn't listening. I wasn't filling in any blanks. I stopped trying to have the answer before the speaker had it. I was stopped trying to assess whether they did a good job on this talk as opposed to last time. Because I'd seen these people I'd heard them speak over the last, 10 plus years. I knew everybody really well. But But by day 3, I'm sitting there, and I remember I'm sitting on one of those kind of crappy metal chairs with the super weird carpet padded seat, and the room's super beigey, and it's all whatever. And I think Elsie was about to get up and speak, and I'm sitting there, and I noticed something has changed. And I'm sitting in my seat, and I'm like, what's changed? And it's the kind of thing where you think, did someone change? Did they turn the heat down, or like, wait, what? And I realized that my whole body felt really gentle and really quiet. And I didn't even really know how those words, and I was trying to sort of, I remember kind of like, my head was so quiet. I remember thinking, what is this? And I had zero frame of reference. So if states of mind have colors, this one hadn't got named yet.
Right.
Like I'm sitting there in this feeling going, what is this? And I just couldn't put it into my memory bank because I couldn't put it into Clever.
Yeah.
I remember sitting there going, well, that's weird. And then what do? You dismiss it. You're like, okay, weird. Because it literally was like feeling super weird, but in a nice way. It was almost like the opposite of being drunk, but in a way I was like, I don't know, I felt something in me, and I just couldn't blame it on anything. It was like there was nothing had happened. Nothing. Yeah. I actually don't think I had any insights. I don't think anything had really happened. So then Elsie's up there and she's talking, and I know Elsie and I think she's lovely, and she's talking about chocolate fudge cake. And I'm like, chocolate. I'm kind of wondering, gluten-free at that point. I'm like, oh, I wish she'd make me a gluten-free one. You know, I'm just listening, and she's talking about chocolate fudge, and this is the experience I get. She's sitting there and she's talking about chocolate fudge cake. My brain is like zoned out, but I'm there. I'm present with her. I'm not thinking about laundry or what I got to do later. I'm just really gently listening to her. I'm really gently with her. Like I've got nothing on it. I've got no agenda. Like I really had nowhere to be, which was so unusual for me. And as I'm listening there and she's talking about chocolate fudge cake, and then she says something, and then she says, la, 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 your true nature, right? But I don't know if you know Elsie, she'll say something and it just goes, boosh. And it hit a hole this big in my chest. It hit this hole. I heard true nature, and it's not the words, but the only words I can describe it is I heard something like when Aaron said, I don't want that for us. But I heard an answer from me before personality, like me before thought. I felt something in me go, really acknowledge the truth of there is me before story. And it was like, it blew a hole in my reality, like literally blew a hole. And Elsie asked me a couple of years later, I was telling her the story, and she goes, was it beautiful, Leela? And I'm like, not really. It was just big. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't bad, but it was a blow. It was like a blow to my reality, because I was dense in thought, like dense. Like, I mean, it's like I was PVC. So I was basically trying to get wet with a really good rain jacket on.
Right.
And this just ripped a hole in that. Like it just, you know, like Superman rips his shirt open. Right. And I heard something so deep. I call it like ancient knowledge, because it has a knowledge that I haven't acquired in this life. It's got nothing to do with my ideas. It's got nothing to do with my identity, my worth, my value, it's got no agenda. And I'm like, and I'm sitting there and I have this really funny experience. I'm sitting there and I'm hearing true identity, there's me before thought, boof, but it doesn't even really have those words totally. It's like it hadn't really got itself together. My head felt like a scaffolding with a bunch of workmen that all happen to be guys, sorry guys, but they're all asleep. They've fallen asleep on the job with their like high vis jackets and their flasks and their scaffolding. I mean, my thoughts in my head had fallen asleep. And when the scaffolding got shaken, because I was like, woof, they go, wait a second, something happened. I mean, literally watch my thoughts go, shit, she heard something, what happened? I mean, I literally felt my head go, hang on. That's not supposed to happen. You're supposed to go through me. I could feel my head go, hang on, she didn't think that. She had to think it before it's allowed to happen. Like it was like a guardian, you know. It's like my head started to kick in and say, hang on a second, where you going? You can't just get in there. Like it's like walking past a bouncer.
Yeah.
Something went in past the bouncer, or a really mean secretary that won't let anyone see the boss. It's like Elsie's words walked right past.
Yeah.
And went to the boss, or went to the whatever, the source. And I remember sitting back in my chair and literally chuckling. And I knew, it's so funny, these thoughts that occurred to you, because this is so outside of everything I'd heard in terms of listening to Sid. I had ideas about what he'd said, but this came from nowhere. It said, oh, that's funny, you'll never understand. I knew that my head would never understand ever. I mean, they might kind of do a pretty dance and get some articulate words about it, but I could feel up here would never get it. And so that moment, I mean, you could really say these moments have been happening forever, but that moment was where I stopped and really considered, oh, this isn't just for other people.